So today our lesson is on Jean-Michel Basquiat, and we are looking at his life, his artwork, and talking about some of the themes, some of the things that he painted about. So we'll look at a few of his artworks and then really dive in and talk about one in particular as we look more deeply at systemic racism. So I would like to start off by walking you through the Padlet. So here's our Padlet. The first column we see are videos. This very first video is, I thought it would be nice to include this. This is a presentation by someone named Michelangelo Rizal. He made a presentation about Basquiat and what he learned about him. So I thought this would be a good example that you could look at since our submissions for the Black History program is coming up, where we're asking you to pick an African-American artist who inspired you, to talk about them a little bit. What inspired you? What kind of impact do you think they made? And then some kind of artwork that you created that was inspired by them. And that can be a drawing, a painting, a poem, a collage. If you have clay and you want to make a sculpture, whatever that is. You can use the art pieces that we've done together with Carrie Kessler on Wednesdays. And you can choose to talk about Jacob Lawrence or Emory Douglas or Basquiat. And you could also choose any of the other African-American artists on the Padlet, or there are plenty more African-American artists. If there's another one that you would like to talk about and who has inspired you, please do that. So that is the first video. The second video is a beautiful animation that talks about the life of Basquiat. This is a read aloud about his life. This is a read aloud called Radiant Child, also about Basquiat's life. And this is read by the author. In 2010, there was a documentary that came out about Basquiat that was filmed by a friend of his. She filmed this in the 80s, but after his death, she was sad. She put the film away for like 20 years and then finally pulled it out and put this documentary together. So this is the trailer for it, and you can watch that to kind of see some of his words. And then this video underneath here, I took an excerpt from it. I kind of talk about it a little bit and then show you a little clip so you can just see a little bit of what Basquiat, an interview, what he was talking about. There's a little filming here of him drawing in his studio, which is kind of cool. It's kind of cool to see an artist at work. And then this final video, it's like 15 minutes. There's 132 or something of his art pieces that somebody just filmed to some music. So if you would like to kind of see that filmed collage of many of his art pieces, then I encourage you to watch that. And then we have his biography here, just written down his life when he was born, what his life was like as a child. Some really impactful things that we see throughout is when he was 8, he got into a car accident. And when he was recuperating in the hospital, his mom brought him a copy of Gray's Anatomy, which is a medical textbook that shows all kinds of diagrams and information about the human body. And this was really inspirational to his work. So his beginnings as a graffiti artist with his friends, Al Diaz and Shannon Dawson. And then his movement from becoming this graffiti artist into becoming an artist in the art world. And he became famous and popular just like that. So he was an artist that was all of a sudden just skyrocketed to fame. The art world was predominantly white. And so he experienced a lot of racism and just prejudice about his artwork. And, he had to constantly encounter that while fighting for his legitimacy, because he was a brilliant artist, a prodigy even. And then Later on in his life, he collaborated. He was very inspired by Andy Warhol. So Andy Warhol, if you remember, he was like, that was like the first art project we did was that pop art about Maria Montessori, if you recall from like the very first week of school, that we looked a little bit about pop art. And Andy Warhol is one of the biggest artist of the pop art era. So Basquiat was very inspired by him, and he would like write to him and send him things, and they finally like met in 1983 and became friends and collaborated and did some work together. And Basquiat died when he was only 27 in 1988. So you can hear me reading the biography here. We have some examples of his street graffiti. So this tag here, SAMO, stands for same old, we'll say stuff. It's actually a swear word, but you can also notice here this little copyright symbol, which we'll talk a little bit more about. He uses this copyright symbol in a lot of his artwork. And then you'll see this crown that was really big. That was kind of his tag. And if you know anything about graffiti art, that's kind of like your signature, like a symbol and a name. So I'll kind of read through some of these here because he was known for these sayings, these provocative sayings about politics and what was going on in the world. And they're not in any particular order. I found these online and I just like screenshotted and put them all here. So, I don't know what order that he did these in, but so this says Samo for the so-called avant-garde. Avant-garde is like this new and different way of doing art. Here's a picture of him like drawing this figure with some letters. I don't know what it says down here at the bottom of this, like an ignorant. I don't know what that says below it. Samo as an end to the 9 to 5. I went to college. Not tonight, honey. Blues think. So that 9 to 5 working all day. This I'll have to make bigger. See what it says here. Samo. Another day, another dime. Undercool, another way to kill some time. Institutions has the most political. NFL, television, the church, Samo, McDonald's, fast food, kind of somebody else tagged that. So he has these boxes here, like you can like check which one. Stop the train of thought. Samo does not cause cancer in laboratory animals. The whole livery line bow like this with the big money all crushed to these feet. For those of us who merely tolerate civilization, Samo as a nagging reminder, as an end to mass-produced individuality, a pin drops like a pungent odor. And then finally, Samo is dead. In 1980, this was like his way. He and his two friends, they parted ways. They stopped. world. It's the most very comics when he was really young. He wanted to be a comic book artist. Um, so there's a few paintings here that he really incorporated the superheroes. This one's called Pow. What is it? Pow, Batman, and Robin. Yeah. Flash in Naples. But here, this one I want to talk about. We have this one's called Slave Traders or Captain America. Captain America was a superhero that showed up in World War II. And we can see here some of the people that he's highlighted for slave traders, and you can also see right. George Washington. He wasn't known to have any slaves, but he was, interestingly enough, a little bit of history for you. So Lincoln is very much portrayed as this president who emancipated slaves and ended slavery. But the full truth is that he was really interested in preserving and saving the Union, the North, and he believed that whites were superior to blacks. There are quotes of him talking about it. Of he didn't believe in black people having equality or having the right to vote, and we can really see evidence of that with the way that slavery ended. There was no protection or help for people that lived their entire lives on a plantation and were slaves to someone else, and then poof, they're free now and they had absolutely nothing. They had no land, they had no property, no capital, and we'll talk a little bit more about that here in just a minute. And so they were just kind of left destitute, and they actually had to then work work for the very people that had enslaved them. And there was a lot of unfair practices that kept them in debt and working, and therefore continued to be enslaved to the people. So we really see that slavery didn't necessarily end in 1865. It kind of just changed forms. It showed up a little bit differently. So he's acknowledging that here. Man of Steel. So the Man of Steel, Superman, it's spelled S-T-E-E-L when talking about that metal, that steel that's hard. But steel, S-T-E-A-L, the homophone, the word that sounds the same, but it has a different meaning. He's meaning it here as someone who steals. What he's stealing, so Basquiat's work, it was so deep, and a lot of people really debated about and wondered. They found his work to be cryptic. But we can see here, he's got kind of this grocery list of eggs, bacon, ice cream. And then we have crime, hoods, subway, mud club, White Street. So what exactly is this Man of Steel? And what's interesting too to note is he used the word Gotham, which is actually the city for Batman. But people think that's because he really saw this parallel between Gotham City and New York City, where he lived. So it's a self-portrait. Fun one. Pez dispenser. Jim Crow. Jim Crow, we know, were those laws in the South that kept people segregated. They showed up after slavery that said African Americans couldn't vote. They had to be separate. So it kept this racism and exploitation going. And you can see here how he's repeated the word Mississippi, Mississippi, Mississippi. Hudson River, that's in New York where he lives. So he's drawing this connection. He's got, let's see, these different rivers. The Ohio, the Thames River, that's in Egypt. Mississippi. Oh, I can't read that one. So these rivers that are flowing through history, through time. And another one with some comic books. This one's called Riddle Me, Batman. And then this was one of his last pieces. It's called Writing with Death. So yeah, we talked about, you can click here to read about and listen to recurring themes in artwork. So he obviously explored racism, Black history, individuality. He examined himself. He had many self-portraits. I only included one here. This, by the way, he has so many pieces of art in his short career from like 1980 to 1988. I think it was like he painted something around 180 paintings, which is incredible. So I, of course, don't have nearly all of them, but he really showed himself, examined himself. The crown was a very dominant theme, and he would put that crown on his head or on the heads of people, Black people he was paying homage to show that they were kings. And he wanted to be a king of his peer group, a king of the art world. So I can go into a little bit that. And then I included like a segment here. One of his, he had a lot of, he had people that he considered to be inspirations, that he had heroes, you know, just like any of us. And when he was young, his dad played a lot of jazz music. And so he grew up kind of just saturated with jazz, and he loved Charlie Parker. So he created several pieces of artwork to pay homage to Charlie Parker, who was who played sax, who also died at a very young age. And so that's included here. This one is kind of, I'll note that if you look, it looks kind of like a grave marker, because, like I said, Charlie Parker died really young, and so he was acknowledging that. And then he would tie in other, most young kings get their heads cut off. So just saying that about making a comment on the racism that he was experiencing. Oh, here we see Thor, another reference to comic book character. So yeah, you can go through here and look at, this was a collaboration. I went ahead and put it here instead of with Basquiat and Warhol because this was his, it was a painting of Charlie Parker. So I put that there. So yeah. And then here's a little section on his collaboration with Andy Warhol. And so this is a picture, a photograph taken of them. And this was the painting that he drew here. You can see that he painted and gifted to Andy Warhol. And so it's kind of like a little bit of their story. Oh, I will record myself reading that. And then here's their art pieces that they made in collaboration. So if you remember that pop art that Andy Warhol did, he liked to choose popular things of the moment, like pick some, like GE, the General Electric symbol, that I would tell you about. Arm & Hammer was another one, like that symbol, that's the symbol for baking soda, but it also has this other meaning of, there's a hammer and an arm. So this one is called Cops. Maybe making a commentary on that, how he perceived this hammer in the arm of the law. There's a couple pieces here on the Olympics. So the Olympics is something that is popular. Paramount Pictures, movies. Oh yeah, this is the one. So Zenith, Zenith is a brand for televisions that way back when, I don't even know if they make Zenith TVs anymore, but just so you know. Here's another one with the General Electric symbol. So you can look through there and you can kind of see these repeating kind of images. That's the Warhol part of it. And then we, of course, can see Basquiat in his style, his skeletal figures, the head. This one's called Third Eye. Third Eye is known to be like the second sight, this beyond seeing. So, all right, and then your project. So I wanted to go back and talk about defacement. So this was a piece of art that he didn't create for, for a gallery or anything. This was something he created in response to a young graffiti artist that he knew who was killed by police. And this really impacted him because he was also a young Black graffiti artist, and his name was Michael Stewart. He was tagging, oh gosh, I can't remember now where he was, but it's unclear what happened, like the details, but police caught him tagging, and then he was later rushed to the hospital, and he was dead. So Basquiat said a lot that he was like, it could have been me, and that's how he felt. It could have very easily been him, but instead he was discovered and kind of propelled up into this fame and fortune really quickly. But he too died young. He was only 27. So, going from having this really difficult childhood to then being this young kid living on the street with friends, tagging, to then being this super famous artist. Everybody, wants a piece of his work, wants a piece of him. And it was a lot to process. So, he got into some things that weren't good for him. And it ultimately ended his life. But I wanted to talk a little bit more about defacement in terms of, because this, since he was a graffiti artist, this is kind of commenting about himself as well and what graffiti art does in terms of what we know as private property. The graffiti is defacing that property. And at the time, the mayor was cracking down on graffiti. And so he has these question marks here. You can see defacement. What is it really defacing? He could also be meaning that the police erased a young Black man. But I wanted to kind of explain something a little bit about property and this institutionalized racism, that system that exists that makes things, that has historically made things very challenging for African Americans. So we go back to all the way back to 1492. We know that there were indigenous peoples living on this land. And Columbus and other colonizers from Europe, and Columbus was from Spain, came over in their ships and essentially stole the land and killed a lot of people. And it's a very interesting thing, because when you think about what is this idea of property, what is this idea of owning land, the indigenous people, they knew that that was kind of this ridiculous idea, really, that the land belonged to everyone and that they took care of the land and then the land took care of them. It didn't make sense for them to have someone who owned it. And so colonizers came over and proceeded to create this concept of land ownership. So it's kind of like if you have 20 people here, and three of these people are like, all right, we own this land. And what does the land do? It provides food, you grow things. So these other 17 people, they don't have any land. They're not able to take care of themselves. So they may get together and they may do something about that and try to fight the people who own the land. So then the people who own the land think, okay, well, let's protect ourselves. Let's hire a couple guys, some big, strong guys, make them a little bigger here. And we'll tell them that if they protect us, then they'll get to have some benefits of the land. All right. So now you have 15 people here. And the only way that they can get anything from this land to take care of themselves is if they work for the landowners. Or before that, before there was the ability to even work, these landowners decided, you know what? We're not going to try to get people to work for us, and we don't want to pay them. We're just going to go over to Africa and we're going to steal some people. So that's what they did. They brought people over in the thousands on slave ships and enslaved them. And then slavery ended. And the free people didn't have anything. They had no land. They had to work for the landowners. And what they would do was they would say, okay, since you don't have a place to live, you can live here in this little hut here, and I'll give you some food, but it's going to cost this much. And you're also going to need to borrow money to have the equipment to work the fields. So they put this debt on the freed people that they had to work off. And every year that debt increased, and they were never able to pay it back. So in a sense, they continue to be slaves. And we could go from there. We could actually talk about this for a really long time, these different manifestations of slavery. Criminalization is one of them, but I thought for now we would just focus on that and this idea of property. So to acquire property, there's two ways. You can inherit the property, meaning it's passed down to you from your family when they die, or you can submit yourself to a landowner until you have enough capital to buy property. So capital is that property or that money. Well, slaves couldn't inherit property because their slaves didn't own any property. Nothing was given to them, like we said, right? They were left in destitution. They were left with nothing when slavery ended. So the only other way was to submit themselves to a landowner until they had enough capital to buy the property. This is essentially the definition of capitalism, which is our current societal structure. Now, the submitting yourself to a landowner or to a business, working for someone else so that you can have this money to buy property, well, it makes it harder when systemic racism exists. So Basquiat was commenting about that, defacing this property. And this defacement of young Black men. So hopefully in our lifetime, we will see change, real change, what we call systemic change, meaning changes in the system, the end of white supremacy, a white supremacy that exploits and survives on the backs of other people in order to keep one group of people superior and above everyone else. So we've been learning about these Black artists who've been expressing their history, their stories through their art, that fundamental need, how we all need to express ourselves. So, pretty long lesson. If you have any questions, you can reach out. I hope you enjoy diving deeper into this Padlet, and looking forward to seeing you Wednesday for our Basquiat inspired art project. See you later.